What would you risk to save a stranger? For Lena Park, 6 words scribbled on a napkin didn't just save a mafia boss's life. They destroyed her invisibility forever. In a world where loyalty is currency and silence is survival, one waitress's split-second decision ignited a war she never asked for and a transformation she couldn't escape. Would you pull the trigger to survive? Would you stand beside power or run from it? Stay until the end to find out how an invisible woman rewrote her destiny. And if this story grips you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Lena's story travels. The smell of garlic and tomatoes had long since stopped registering to Lena Park. After 3 years waiting tables at Giordano's, the scents had become part of her skin, woven into the fabric of her existence like the ache in her lower back and the perpetual exhaustion that colored her days. She moved through the dining room with practiced efficiency, a ghost in a black apron, refilling water glasses and clearing plates with the kind of invisibility that came from necessity rather than choice. 26 years old, and Lena had perfected the art of being nobody. It was safer that way. Safer to keep her eyes down, her voice soft, her presence forgettable. In Little Italy, where old-world traditions still held sway, and certain families commanded respect through fear rather than affection, invisibility was a survival skill. Lena had learned it young, watching her mother scrub floors in wealthy homes, teaching her daughter that people like them, immigrants, working poor, perpetually on the edge, stayed alive by staying unnoticed. The Friday evening shift at Giordano's hummed with its usual rhythm. Couples leaned across candlelit tables, their laughter mixing with the soft crooning of Dean Martin from the ancient speakers. Families gathered in the larger booths, multiple generations sharing platters of pasta and arguing good-naturedly about everything and nothing. The kitchen's heat bled into the dining room despite the valiant efforts of the ancient air conditioning system, and Lena's feet throbbed in the sensible black shoes she'd bought at a thrift store 6 months ago. She was calculating tips in her head, $17 so far, maybe 30 by closing if she was lucky, when the temperature in the room changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in the ambient noise, conversations dropping half a decibel, the scrape of a chair as someone adjusted their position to get a better view of the door. Lena had learned to read these signals the way a sailor reads the wind. Something was happening. She glanced toward the entrance and felt her stomach tighten. Marco Bellucci stood in the doorway like a king surveying his kingdom. 6'2" of tailored menace, his charcoal suit probably cost more than Lena made in 6 months. Dark hair swept back from a face that would have been handsome if not for the hardness in his eyes. Eyes that had seen too much, done too much, forgiven too little. He was 42, though the years sat on him like armor rather than age. Power radiated from him in waves that had nothing to do with the 2 men flanking him, their jackets cut to conceal the obvious bulges at their hips. Everyone in Little Italy knew Marco Bellucci. More importantly, everyone knew what Marco Bellucci did, even if nobody spoke it aloud. He was a ghost story told in whispers, a shadow that moved through legitimate businesses while controlling everything that happened in the dark. He owned half the neighborhood, literally owned it, buildings and businesses, and the loyalty of men who would kill on his word, and the half he didn't own, he influenced. Lena had served him before, twice. Each time she'd perfected her invisible routine: take the order, bring the food, refill the wine, accept the generous tip with a quiet "thank you," and disappear. Don't make eye contact, don't speak unless spoken to, don't become memorable, don't become a problem. Tony, the maitre d', materialized at Marco's side with the practiced obsequiousness of a man who understood exactly how the world worked. Words were exchanged, too quiet for Lena to hear. And then Tony was leading Marco and his men through the dining room. The sea of diners parted without anyone seeming to move, space simply opening up as if choreographed. They headed toward the back corner booth, the one with clear sight lines to both the entrance and the kitchen, the one that was always kept available even without a reservation, just in case. Lena's section. Her heart sank even as her face remained carefully neutral. She waited the appropriate 30 seconds, long enough to be respectful, not so long as to seem neglectful, before approaching with menus and the water pitcher. The 2 bodyguards had taken positions at a nearby table, their backs to the wall, their attention on everything except the menus Lena placed before them. "Good evening, Mr. Bellucci," she said quietly, her eyes focused on a point just past his left shoulder. "Can I start you with something to drink?" "Chianti," Marco said. His voice was surprisingly soft, cultured, not the rough growl she might have expected. "The 97 if Sal still has it in the cellar." "Of course." Lena scribbled the note, though she'd remember without writing it down. She always remembered. "And for dinner?" "I'll decide when you bring the wine." It was a dismissal. Lena took it gratefully, retreating to the bar where Sal kept the good bottles locked up. The old bartender raised an eyebrow when she made the request, but he unlocked the cabinet without comment and pulled out a dusty bottle that probably cost more than Lena's rent. "Be careful, Piccola," Sal murmured as he handed it over. "Men like that, they're like wolves. You don't want them to notice you." "I'm nobody," Lena replied automatically. "Nothing to notice." But as she returned to Marco's table, uncorking the wine with practiced efficiency and pouring exactly the right amount into his glass, she felt the weight of his attention. Just for a moment, his dark eyes lifted to her face, and she saw something flicker there, curiosity perhaps, or assessment. Then it was gone, and he was tasting the wine, nodding approval, and Lena was invisible again. She was halfway back to the bar when the front door opened. The woman who entered commanded attention the way Marco commanded respect, through sheer force of presence. She was beautiful in the way of expensive things, surgically enhanced, flawlessly maintained, draped in designer labels that screamed wealth. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, catching the light with every movement. Her hair fell in perfect waves of honey blonde, her makeup applied with expert precision to enhance features already striking. But it was her eyes that made Lena's stomach clench. Cold, calculating, angry. Isabella Bellucci, Marco's wife. Estranged, according to the neighborhood gossip that filtered through Giordano's like smoke. They'd been separated for nearly a year, living in different houses, moving in different circles. The word was that Isabella had taken the separation poorly. The word was that she blamed Marco for everything, for the lifestyle she'd never been able to escape, for the cage she'd gilded herself, for the love that had curdled into something toxic and sharp. The word was that Isabella wanted revenge. Behind her, 4 men filed into the restaurant. They wore suits, but the fit was wrong. Too tight in the shoulders, too loose in the waist, cut for fashion rather than the concealment of weapons. But Lena could see the bulges anyway, could read the tension in their movements, the way their eyes immediately found Marco in the back corner. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a woman happening to dine at the same restaurant as her estranged husband. This was deliberate. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked toward Marco's table and saw that his bodyguards had noticed too. One had his hand inside his jacket, the other was already rising from his seat. But Marco himself seemed unconcerned, swirling his wine, his attention apparently focused on the menu in front of him. Either he didn't know his wife had just arrived, or he didn't care. Isabella's laugh rang out, too loud, too bright. "Anthony," she called to Tony, using a familiarity that made the maitre d' visibly uncomfortable. "A table for 5, somewhere visible. I want to see the whole room." Tony stammered something Lena couldn't hear. Isabella's men spread out slightly, not threatening, not yet, but positioning themselves. One near the kitchen entrance, one by the bar, 2 flanking the path to Marco's corner booth. They were boxing him in. Lena stood frozen by the drink station, her mind racing. This wasn't her business. This wasn't her world. She was nobody, nothing, invisible. Whatever was about to happen between Marco Bellucci and his wife, it had nothing to do with a waitress trying to make rent. "Walk away," the voice of survival whispered. "Go to the kitchen. Take your break early. Be anywhere but here when this explodes." But Lena's eyes had found something that nobody else seemed to notice. While Isabella held court near the entrance, drawing all attention to herself, one of her men, the one near the bar, had slipped his hand inside his jacket. Not all the way. Just far enough. His eyes weren't on Isabella. They were on Marco, measuring distance, calculating angles. The setup was elegant in its simplicity. Isabella would create a distraction, a scene, something loud and public. While everyone watched her, while Marco's attention was divided, while his bodyguards had to decide how to handle a situation where the threat wore the face of the boss's wife, that's when the man by the bar would move. Lena's mother had once told her that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing the thing that terrified you because something else, love, duty, conscience, mattered more. Lena had never understood that. She'd spent her whole life choosing safety over everything else. But standing in Giordano's, watching pieces move into position for violence that would spray blood across the red-checkered tablecloths and terrify the families just trying to enjoy their Friday dinner, Lena discovered that invisibility had limits. She couldn't watch people die, not when she could do something about it. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed a napkin from the stack beside the drink station. The pen in her apron pocket felt impossibly heavy. She had seconds, maybe less, before someone noticed her, before she became visible in all the wrong ways. 6 words. That's all she could manage, scrawled in handwriting made jagged by adrenaline. Your wife set a trap. Leave now. Lena folded the napkin once, twice, her movements automatic from years of table service. She picked up the wine bottle, still half full, still expensive, still her excuse for approaching Marco's table, and made her legs move. The distance from the drink station to the corner booth couldn't have been more than 30 feet. It felt like crossing a continent. Every eye in the restaurant seemed trained on her, though logically, Lena knew that wasn't true. All attention remained fixed on Isabella, who had finally allowed Tony to seat her at a prominent table with clear sightlines to her husband. Perfect position to watch her plan unfold. Lena reached Marco's table on legs that threatened to give out. More wine, sir? Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. She was already pouring, the motion covering the moment when her left hand placed the folded napkin directly beside his glass. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Marco didn't look at the napkin, didn't look at her. He simply sat there, apparently unbothered by his wife's presence, his attention still on the menu. Then his hand moved. Casual, unhurried. He picked up his wine glass with his right hand while his left palm covered the napkin, sliding it toward him with a movement so subtle that anyone not standing right there would have missed it entirely. Lena stepped back, the wine bottle clutched to her chest like a shield. She should leave, should retreat to the kitchen, the bathroom, anywhere that wasn't ground zero for whatever came next. But she couldn't move. Her feet had rooted to the floor, her eyes locked on Marco as he unfolded the napkin below the table's edge, his expression never changing. She watched understanding hit him, watched his eyes flick toward Isabella's table, then sweep the room with new purpose. Watched him catalog the positions of her men, the blocked exits, the trap that had been laid so carefully. When his gaze returned to Lena, she saw something in those dark eyes that she'd never expected to see directed at her. Recognition. Not of her face. She was still nobody, still invisible, but of what she'd done, of the choice she'd made, of the line she'd just crossed. Thank you, Marco said quietly. Then louder, to his bodyguards. We're leaving, now. The words were barely out of his mouth when Isabella stood, her voice cutting through the ambient restaurant noise. Leaving so soon, darling, but you haven't finished your wine. It was the signal. The man by the bar moved first, his hand emerging from his jacket with something dark and metallic. But Marco's bodyguards were already in motion, one shoving their boss down while the other drew his own weapon. Chairs crashed. Someone screamed. The family at the nearest table scrambled away, the father throwing himself over his children. Lena's survival instinct finally kicked in. She dove sideways, hitting the floor hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. The wine bottle shattered somewhere to her left, red liquid spreading across the tile like blood. Gunshots. Not many, 3, maybe 4, sharp cracks that made Lena's ears ring and her heart stop. More screaming. The sound of breaking glass, running feet, and then, impossibly, silence. Lena lay on the floor, her cheek pressed against cold tile, her entire body shaking. She couldn't see anything except the underside of a table and someone's abandoned purse. Couldn't hear anything except the ringing in her ears and her own ragged breathing. Clear. A male voice, hoarse and urgent. Boss, we need to move. Police are coming. Footsteps. Multiple sets, moving fast. The front door banging open, car engines roaring to life outside. Then nothing. Lena didn't know how long she lay there, long enough for her trembling to subside slightly, long enough for other sounds to filter back. Crying, urgent conversations, the distant wail of sirens. Finally, She pushed herself up on shaking arms, glass crunching under her palms. The restaurant was chaos. Tables overturned, food and wine spilled across the floor, diners huddled in corners or fled entirely. Near the bar, one of Isabella's men lay motionless, blood pooling beneath him. The others had vanished. Isabella herself was gone, and Marco Bellucci had disappeared like smoke. Lena sat on the floor amid the wreckage, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She'd broken her cardinal rule. She'd become visible. She'd involved herself in something that was absolutely, definitively none of her business. She'd saved a mafia boss's life. The police arrived in a storm of blue uniforms and questions. Lena answered on autopilot, telling them she'd been refilling wine when the shooting started. She'd hit the floor. She hadn't seen anything useful. Other diners corroborated the basics. Isabella Bellucci had arrived with armed men. Her husband had left. Violence had erupted. But nobody seemed to have noticed the napkin. Nobody knew that Lena had warned Marco. In the chaos, that detail had been lost. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt exposed, marked, changed. The police kept the restaurant for hours, taking statements, photographing the scene, removing the body. It was nearly 2 a.m. when they finally let the staff go. Sal pressed $200 into Lena's hand. Compensation for the trauma, the lost tips, the fact that Giordano's would be closed for days while they cleaned and repaired. Lena walked home through streets gone quiet, her feet carrying her automatically through neighborhoods she'd navigated 1,000 times. Her studio apartment was only 8 blocks from the restaurant, close enough to walk, far enough to pretend she didn't carry the smell of garlic and tomatoes everywhere she went. She climbed 3 flights of stairs, unlocked her door, and stepped into the small space that held everything she owned: a futon that doubled as couch and bed, a kitchenette with a hot plate and a mini fridge, a bathroom the size of a closet, thrift store furniture and secondhand everything, home, safe, invisible. Except Lena didn't feel invisible anymore. She changed into sleep clothes mechanically, washed her face, brushed her teeth. Normal routines. As if this had been a normal night. As if she hadn't just altered the trajectory of her entire life with 6 words on a napkin. She was climbing into bed when she heard it. A soft sound from the fire escape outside her single window. Metal creaking, weight settling. Lena's heart stuttered. She stood frozen, her hand reaching automatically for her phone. Should she call the police? But what would she tell them? That she heard a noise? In New York City, where fire escapes creaked constantly, where neighbors climbed through windows because they'd locked themselves out, the knock was quiet. Deliberate. 3 taps, perfectly spaced. Every instinct screamed at Lena to stay silent, to pretend she hadn't heard, to be invisible again. But she'd stopped being invisible the moment she'd written those 6 words. She crossed to the window on legs that barely supported her weight. The curtain was thin, cheap fabric that didn't quite block the streetlight from outside. She could see a silhouette through it, large, male, alone. Lena pulled back the curtain with shaking hands. Marco Bellucci crouched on her fire escape, still in the same suit, though now rumpled and stained. His dark eyes met hers through the glass, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he held up his hands, palms out. Universal gesture of peace, of supplication. "I just want to talk," he said. His voice was muffled by the glass, but clear enough. "Please." 1,000 thoughts crashed through Lena's mind. This was how people disappeared. This was how invisible women became cautionary tales. She should refuse, should call the police, should do anything except open that window and let a mafia boss into her apartment. But he'd said please. Marco Bellucci, who probably hadn't asked permission for anything in 20 years, had said, "Please." Lena's hands moved before her brain could override them. She unlocked the window and slid it open, stepping back quickly to put distance between them. "How did you find me?" "I own the restaurant." Marco climbed through with surprising grace for a man his size. "I know where all the employees live. Safety measure. I like to know who's working around my business interests." Of course he did. Of course Marco Bellucci would have files on every waitress and busboy, would know their addresses and probably their bank account balances too. Lena backed up another step, her spine hitting the wall beside her kitchenette. "Why are you here?" Marco stood just inside her window, making no move to come closer. This close, she could see the toll of the evening on his face, the tightness around his eyes, the muscle jumping in his jaw, the barely controlled tension in his shoulders. You saved my life tonight. I gave you information, Lena corrected. You saved your own life. Semantics. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Without your warning, I would have been too slow. They would have caught me in crossfire between my men and theirs. At least one of us would be dead, probably me. Lena's throat felt tight. Then we're even. You can go. We're not even. Marco's voice went soft, dangerous. In my world, debts matter. You gave me my life. That's not a small thing. I don't want anything from you. I know. And there was something in his expression now, something Lena couldn't quite read. That's what makes you dangerous. The word hung in the air between them. Dangerous. Her, the invisible waitress who'd never done anything more confrontational than ask customers to please not smoke in the non-smoking section. I'm not dangerous, Lena whispered. I'm nobody. You were nobody. Marco took a step closer, and Lena pressed harder against the wall, even though he'd stopped well outside her personal space. But the moment you handed me that napkin, you became somebody. And in my world, everybody who's somebody has to choose a side. I'm not choosing anything. I'm staying out of it. I'm going back to being invisible. You can't. 2 words said with absolute certainty. Isabella knows someone warned me. She's smart enough to work backward to figure out who was close enough, who had the opportunity. And when she does, she'll come after me, Lena finished. The floor seemed to drop out from under her feet. Of course. Of course there would be consequences. She'd inserted herself into a war between people who solved problems with bullets, and now she was a loose end, a problem. I can protect you, Marco said. Why would you do that? Because you saved my life, because I pay my debts, because… He paused, something flickering across his face. Because you did something brave and stupid without expecting anything in return, and I've spent 20 years around people who don't do anything unless there's an angle. You're either incredibly naive or genuinely good, and either way, I'm not letting Isabella kill you for it. Lena's laugh came out sharp, borderline hysterical. How generous! The Mafia boss will protect me from his Mafia wife. Estranged wife, Marco corrected. And yes, that's exactly what I'm offering. In exchange for what? He studied her for a long moment. Nothing. I'm not asking you to inform for me or work for me or compromise yourself in any way. I'm offering protection, pure and simple. There's no such thing as pure and simple, not in your world. No, Marco agreed. There isn't, but it's still the best option you have. Lena wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she'd take her chances, call the police, maybe leave town entirely, but she'd grown up in neighborhoods where the police arrived after the fact, and protection meant knowing which families controlled which blocks. She wasn't naive enough to think a restraining order would stop someone like Isabella Bellucci. What does protection look like? She asked carefully. A man outside your building, 24 hours. Someone to walk you to and from work once Giordano's reopens. Maybe a new apartment in a building with better security, if you're willing. I can't afford a new apartment. I can? I'm not letting you pay my rent. Lena's voice came out sharper than she'd intended. I'm not becoming… I won't be owned. Something shifted in Marco's expression. Respect, maybe, or surprise that she was drawing lines when her life hung in the balance. Not owned, protected. There's a difference. Is there? In your world? In my world, Marco said slowly. There are different kinds of transactions. Some are about ownership, some are about debt, and some are about the kind of respect you earn when you risk everything for a stranger without asking what's in it for you. This is the third kind. Lena didn't know if she believed him, didn't know if she could trust a man who made his fortune from fear and violence, but she also knew that the moment Isabella figured out who'd warned Marco, Lena's invisibility would become a shroud instead of a shield. One man outside, she said finally. Just outside, not in the building. I keep this apartment. I keep my job when the restaurant reopens. And this is temporary, just until Isabella stops looking for whoever warned you. Marco's smile was grim. Isabella doesn't stop. Not once she's decided someone's an enemy. Then you'd better help her decide I'm not worth her attention. I'll do what I can. He moved toward the window, then paused. For what it's worth, Lena Park, I wish you hadn't helped me tonight. Your life was simpler when you were invisible. You know my name. I know everyone's name. Marco climbed onto the fire escape with the same grace he'd used entering. The question is whether I'll need to remember it. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving Lena alone in her tiny apartment with the window open and her hand still shaking. She crossed to the window, closed it, locked it, then stood there staring out at the empty fire escape. Somewhere in the city, Isabella Bellucci was planning her next move. Somewhere, men with guns were receiving orders. Somewhere, the machinery of violence was grinding into motion. And Lena, who had spent her entire life staying small and quiet and invisible, was now caught in the gears. She'd saved Marco Bellucci's life with 6 words on a napkin. Now she had to live with the consequences, if she lived at all. The man outside Lena's building arrived before dawn. She watched from her window as a black SUV pulled up to the curb, idling for a moment before the engine cut. The driver didn't emerge. He simply sat there, a shadow behind tinted glass, positioned where he could see both the building's entrance and the mouth of the alley that ran along its side. Protection, Marco had called it. To Lena, it felt like surveillance. She made coffee with shaking hands, the cheap mister. Coffee machine sputtering and hissing as it always did. The familiar sound should have been comforting. Instead, it emphasized how nothing would be familiar again. Her life had split into before and after, before she'd written 6 words that shattered her anonymity, and after, when invisibility became impossible. The coffee tasted like ash. Lena drank it anyway, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. Same face, same tired eyes and too thin frame. Same mousy brown hair pulled into the same practical ponytail. But the woman looking back at her had crossed a line last night, had stepped into a world where mercy was rare and debts were measured in blood. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Giordano's closed for repairs, 2 weeks minimum. Sal will pay you anyway. Stay home. Stay safe. M. Of course, Marco had her number. Of course, he'd already arranged everything, making decisions about her life without consulting her. Lena's fingers hovered over the keyboard, a dozen angry responses forming and dissolving. But what was the point? She'd accepted his protection. She'd made her choice. She deleted the text without responding. The next 3 days passed in a strange limbo. Lena ventured out only for necessities, groceries, the laundromat, and a quick walk to the bodega on the corner. Each time, the black SUV followed at a discreet distance. The driver never approached, never acknowledged her directly, but his presence was constant, a reminder that she was marked now. Changed. On the 4th morning, Lena woke to pounding on her door. Her heart stuttered, memories of gunshots and screaming flooding back. She grabbed her phone, Marco's number already pulled up, even though she'd told herself she wouldn't use it. But the voice that came through the door stopped her cold. "Lena, open up, honey. It's Mrs. Chen from downstairs." Lena's elderly neighbor had never knocked on her door before. They exchanged pleasantries in the hallway occasionally, nothing more. She crossed to the door, checking the peephole to confirm it was actually Mrs. Chen and not some elaborate trap. The old woman stood there in a floral house dress, her face creased with worry. Lena opened the door a crack, the chain still engaged. "Mrs. Chen? Is everything okay?" "That's what I came to ask you, dear." Mrs. Chen's eyes were sharp despite her 70-some years. "There's been a car outside for days, same one, just sitting there. And this morning, a woman came asking questions about you." Ice water flooded Lena's veins. "What kind of woman?" "Fancy, blonde, designer, everything." Mrs. Chen leaned closer, lowering her voice. "She wanted to know your schedule. When you came and went. If you had visitors." I told her I minded my own business, but Lena, that woman, she wasn't asking friendly questions. Isabella. It had to be. She'd figured it out somehow, or was narrowing down possibilities, and Lena had just moved higher on her list. "Thank you for telling me," Lena managed. There's a situation, but it's being handled." "By the man in the car?" Mrs. Chen's expression was skeptical. "Honey, I lived through things you can't imagine. I know what protection looks like, and I know what surveillance looks like. You be careful which one you've got." After Mrs. Chen left, Lena stood in her apartment with her back against the door, trying to control her breathing. She'd known this was coming. Marco had warned her, But knowing and experiencing were different things, and the reality of Isabella Bellucci asking her neighbors questions made everything viscerally, terrifyingly real. She was still standing there when her phone rang, Marco's number. "Your neighbor is a smart woman," he said without preamble. "You should listen to her. You're watching my apartment." Not a question. "I'm keeping you alive. There's a difference." A pause. "Isabella's escalating. She went to 3 other tenants after Mrs. Chen. Someone will talk eventually. You need to leave." "This is my home." "This is a target." Marco's voice was hard now, the softness from their first conversation gone. "Pack a bag. Essentials only. You have 20 minutes. You can't just order me." "Yes, I can. Because the alternative is you stay there and Isabella's people come back tonight with something more permanent than questions." "Is that what you want?" Lena's hands were shaking again. "Where would I even go? I have a place. Safe, secure. You'll have your own space, privacy. But you need to decide now, Lena. Pride is a luxury you can't afford." She wanted to refuse, wanted to tell Marco Bellucci exactly where he could put his orders and his safe houses. But Mrs. Chen's worried face flashed through her mind, and the memory of the dead man on Giordano's floor, and the cold calculation in Isabella's eyes when she'd walked into the restaurant. 20 minutes, Lena said, and hung up. She grabbed the duffel bag from the top of her closet and started throwing clothes into it. Jeans, shirts, underwear, her 2 nice dresses for job interviews she'd never scheduled. Toiletries from the bathroom. The photo of her mother, the only one she had, carefully wrapped in a sweater. Her laptop, old and slow, but hers. The envelope of cash she kept hidden in a coffee can. $340, her entire emergency fund. Everything she owned that mattered fit in one bag. The realization should have been depressing. Instead, it felt oddly liberating. 18 minutes after Marco's call, Lena stood on the sidewalk with her duffel, watching the black SUV pull up. The rear door opened. She'd expected the driver to be alone, but Marco himself sat in the back seat, his expression unreadable. "Get in." Lena hesitated, every instinct screaming that getting into that car would be the point of no return. Once she accepted this level of protection, once she let Marco move her into his safe house, she'd be admitting something she wasn't ready to admit, that she'd well and truly stepped into his world. "Lena." Marco's voice was quieter now, almost gentle. "Please." There was that word again. Please, as if she had a choice, as if this was a request rather than a necessity. She got in the car. They drove in silence through morning traffic, heading away from Little Italy toward neighborhoods Lena recognized but had never lived in. Cleaner streets, better maintained buildings, the kind of areas where doormen stood outside and security cameras covered every angle. After 20 minutes, the SUV pulled into an underground garage beneath a renovated brownstone. "This way," Marco said, leading her to an elevator that required a key card to operate. They rode to the 3rd floor in silence. When the doors opened, he guided her down a hallway with only 2 doors, stopping at the one on the right. The apartment beyond was nothing like Lena's studio. Hardwood floors gleamed in the morning light streaming through tall windows. Modern furniture in neutral tones. A full kitchen with appliances that looked like they'd never been used. 2 bedrooms, one with an attached bathroom that had a tub big enough to swim in. "It's furnished," Marco said, moving through the space with the ease of familiarity. "Kitchen stocked with basics. There's a 2nd set of keys in the drawer by the door. The building has 24-hour security, cameras on every floor, and the neighbors mind their own business." Lena set her duffel down, feeling completely out of place. "I can't afford this." "You're not paying for it. I own the building." "Of course you do." She turned to face him. "And what's the catch? When do you tell me what you actually want in exchange for all this?" Marco studied her for a long moment. "I want you alive. That's it. That's the entire transaction. Nobody gives something for nothing, not in your world." "No," he agreed. "They don't. But you're not nothing, Lena. You saved my life. This," he gestured at the apartment, "this is what that's worth to me." Before Lena could respond, Marco's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened. "I have to go. Don't leave the building without calling me first. Don't open the door unless you know who's on the other side. And don't trust anyone who asks questions about me or Isabella." Wait. Lena caught his arm as he headed for the door, then immediately released it, shocked by her own boldness. What happens now? How long do I have to hide? Until it's safe. And when will that be? Marco's smile was sharp and cold. When Isabella stops being a problem. However long that takes. He left before Lena could ask what stops being a problem actually meant. She stood in the middle of the expensive apartment, surrounded by luxury she hadn't earned and protection she'd never asked for, and felt the walls closing in. This was a cage. Gilded, comfortable, safer than her studio. But a cage nonetheless. Lena spent the next week learning the contours of her new prison. The apartment had everything she could need, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Marco had said the building had security cameras. Were they watching her? Recording her movements? She found herself performing for invisible audiences, keeping her expression neutral, her actions mundane. The paranoia was exhausting. On the 8th day, Marco came back. He arrived without warning, using a key Lena hadn't known he had, catching her in sweatpants and an old t-shirt, her hair unwashed and piled on top of her head. "We need to talk," he said, and the grimness in his voice made Lena's stomach drop. She followed him to the living room where he produced a tablet and pulled up a series of photos. Lena's face went cold as she recognized herself in the images, walking to the bodega, entering the laundromat, sitting by her apartment window. "Isabella's people took these 3 days before you moved," Marco said. "We intercepted them, but the point is made. She knew where you lived. She had surveillance set up. If you'd stayed, I'd be dead." Lena's voice came out flat. "You've made that very clear." "What I haven't made clear is how determined she is." Marco swiped to a new photo. A man Lena didn't recognize, his face bruised and bloodied. "This is Tony, the maitre d' from Giordano's. Isabella's people grabbed him 2 days ago. Wanted to know who'd been close enough to my table to pass me information." Lena's hands went numb. "Is he alive?" "Barely. He didn't give you up because he didn't know. But Lena, she's working through everyone who was in that restaurant. Eventually she'll find someone who saw something, someone who remembers you refilling my wine right before I left. And when she does, so what do you want me to do?" Lena interrupted. "Hide forever? Change my name? Disappear?" "I want you to help me end this." The words hung in the air between them. Lena stared at Marco, trying to process what he was suggesting. "End this how?" "Isabella wants me dead. She's allied with the Castellano family to make it happen, but she's sloppy, angry, making mistakes." Marco leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "She thinks I don't know about her plans, that I'm waiting for her to come at me. But what if we turned that around? What if we gave her exactly what she wanted, a chance to attack, except on my terms, not hers?" "You want to use me as bait?" Lena's voice was hollow. "I want to give you a choice. You can stay hidden, safe, living in this apartment until I've neutralized Isabella through other means. That could take months, years, or..." He paused. "Or you can help me draw her out. One night, one confrontation, and then it's over. One night where I could die. One night where you'd be protected by the best people I have. One night where you'd be in control instead of hiding." Marco's expression was unreadable. "I won't force you. This has to be your decision. But Lena, I've been watching you this week. You're going stir-crazy in here. You're not built for hiding. You're built for surviving, and surviving means taking action." Lena stood, pacing to the window that overlooked the street 3 stories below. Normal people moved through their normal lives down there. Going to work, meeting friends, living without fear that a Mafia boss's estranged wife might put a bullet in their head. She'd been one of them. Invisible, safe, and miserable. The thought came unbidden, but once it surfaced, Lena couldn't push it back down. She'd been invisible, yes, but she'd also been sleepwalking through life. Working dead-end jobs for poverty wages, never taking risks, never becoming anything more than the frightened girl her mother had raised her to be. "What would I have to do?" she asked quietly. "Appear with me? Publicly. At a charity auction 3 days from now." Marco had moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle. "Isabella will be there. She'll see you. She'll know you're important to me. And when she makes her move, you'll be ready." "We'll be ready," Marco corrected. "My people. Your protection. This ends with Isabella in custody or dead, and you get your life back. Will I? Lena turned to face him. Even if this works, even if Isabella is no longer a threat, do you really think I can go back to being invisible after this? After people see me with you? After I'm connected to whatever you're planning? Something flickered across Marco's face. Regret, maybe. Or recognition of a truth he'd been avoiding. No, he said finally. You can't go back. That life ended the moment you handed me that napkin. But you can go forward. You can build something new, something better than invisible. Or I can die trying. Yes, Marco agreed. You can. I won't lie to you about the risks, Lena. Isabella's dangerous. Her allies are dangerous. But you're already in danger. At least this way, you're not waiting for the axe to fall. You're holding the blade. Lena looked into Marco's dark eyes and saw her own reflection there. Small, scared, but not invisible. Not anymore. Maybe never again. I need time to think, she said. You have 24 hours. After that, I need to know whether to plan for 1 or 2 at that auction. He moved toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, I think you're braver than you give yourself credit for. Most people who'd lived your life would take the safe option. The fact that you're even considering this says something. It says I'm an idiot. Marco's laugh was unexpected and genuine. Maybe, but you're an idiot who saved my life. That counts for something. After he left, Lena stood at the window for hours, watching the sun set over a city that suddenly felt both familiar and foreign. She'd grown up in these streets, learned their rhythms, their dangers, their small mercies. But she'd never really lived here. She'd just survived, day after day, paycheck to paycheck, invisible and safe and slowly dying inside. 6 words on a napkin had changed everything. The question was whether she had the courage to see that change through to its conclusion. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. I know who you are. I know what you did. We should talk. Isabella Lena's hands went cold. She stared at the message, her heart hammering. Isabella had found her. Despite the new apartment, despite Marco's protection, despite everything, Isabella knew. A second text arrived before Lena could process the first. The auction. Wear something nice. I want to look you in the eye when I destroy everything you care about. Lena's decision crystallized in that moment. She could keep hiding, keep running, keep living in fear of when Isabella would make her move. Or she could meet that threat head-on terms she helped set, with people who'd sworn to protect her. It wasn't courage that made her reach for her phone and call Marco. It was fury. Cold, clean fury at this woman who'd put a target on her back for the crime of doing the right thing. Fury at a world where saving someone's life marked you for death. Fury at herself for ever believing that invisibility was the same as safety. Marco answered on the first ring. Lena? I'll do it, she said. The auction, the bait, whatever you need. But Marco, she paused, making sure her voice was steady. When this is over, when Isabella's dealt with, I'm not going back to waiting tables. I'm not going back to being nobody. You've pulled me into your world. That means you're going to help me find a place in it that doesn't involve hiding or dying. Understood? The silence on the other end stretched for several heartbeats. Then Marco said, Understood. I'll pick you up tomorrow. We need to prepare you for what's coming. I'm already prepared, Lena said. I stopped being invisible. Everything after that is just details. She hung up before he could respond, her hands still shaking but her mind clear for the first time since that night at Giordano's. She'd crossed the line. She'd saved Marco Bellucci's life with 6 words that should have been meaningless. Now she was going to see exactly what that choice was worth, and whether she could survive the consequences long enough to build something from the ashes of her invisible life. 3 days until the auction. 3 days to prepare for the confrontation that would either free her from Isabella's vendetta or end her permanently. 3 days to become someone new. Lena walked to her duffel bag, still mostly unpacked in the bedroom, and pulled out one of her 2 nice dresses. It was simple, black, bought from a thrift store for a job interview that had never panned out. Not the kind of thing you wore to a charity auction where tickets probably cost more than she made in a month. She'd need something better. Something that said she belonged at Marco Bellucci's side, even if it was a lie. Even if the only reason she'd be there was to draw out a woman who wanted her dead. Her phone buzzed again. Marco. Dressmaker will be there at 9 tomorrow morning. Don't argue. If you're doing this, we're doing it right. Despite everything, the fear, the fury, the knowledge that she was walking toward danger instead of away from it, Lena smiled. Marco Bellucci, organized crime boss, was sending her a dressmaker, as if the right outfit could protect her from bullets, as if appearance mattered more than survival. But maybe in his world, it did. Maybe the right dress, the right attitude, the right amount of visible confidence could be armor just as much as Kevlar and bodyguards. Lena looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Same face, same tired eyes. But something had changed behind them. A hardness that hadn't been there before. A determination born from fear and fury, and the simple, stubborn refusal to let Isabella Bellucci or anyone else make her disappear. She'd been invisible her whole life. Now she was going to be impossible to miss. And if that visibility got her killed, at least she'd die as somebody, rather than nobody. 3 days. The thought echoed through her mind as she climbed into bed in an apartment that wasn't hers, protected by people she didn't fully trust, preparing for a confrontation that could end in her death. 3 days until she walked into a room full of New York's elite and criminal underworld alike, wearing a dress she couldn't afford, on the arm of a man who traded in violence and fear. 3 days until Lena Park stopped running and started fighting back. She fell asleep with Isabella's text message still glowing on her phone screen, a reminder of what waited at the end of those 72 hours. But for the first time since she'd written 6 words on a napkin and destroyed her invisibility forever, Lena wasn't afraid of what came next. She was ready for it. The dressmaker arrived precisely at 9, a severe-looking woman named Claudia, who took one look at Lena and made a sound somewhere between sympathy and professional challenge. She'd brought 3 assistants and enough fabric samples to cover the apartment's dining table twice over. Mr. Bellucci says you need something that commands attention, Claudia said, circling Lena like a predator assessing prey. Something that says you belong on his arm, but also... She paused, her sharp eyes taking in details Lena couldn't imagine mattered. Something that lets you move. Yes? Lena glanced at Marco, who'd arrived with the dressmaker and now stood by the window, apparently reviewing something on his phone. Move? She means run, fight, or dive for cover without the dress splitting, Marco said without looking up. Claudia's dressed women for my events before. She understands the requirements. The casual way he said it, as if needing a dress suitable for combat was perfectly normal, made Lena's stomach clench. This was really happening. In 2 days, she'd walk into a room designed to showcase wealth and power, knowing that somewhere in that crowd, Isabella Bellucci would be planning her death. The fitting took 3 hours. Claudia and her team measured, pinned, draped, and argued in rapid Italian that Lena couldn't follow. When they finally let her see the result in the full-length mirror, Lena barely recognized herself. The dress was midnight blue, almost black in certain light, with a neckline that was elegant without being provocative. It hugged her frame in ways that made her look less fragile, more substantial. The fabric had a subtle shimmer that caught light with movement, and the skirt, while appearing formal, had hidden panels that would allow her to run if necessary. "It's beautiful," Lena whispered. "It's armor," Claudia corrected. "Beauty is secondary. Mr. Bellucci, she'll need shoes, 3-inch heel, no higher, stable base, and jewelry, nothing that can be grabbed or used against her." Marco finally looked up from his phone, and something flickered across his face when he saw Lena in the dress. "Perfect. Have it ready by tomorrow afternoon." After Claudia and her team left, taking the dress for final alterations, Marco stayed. He moved through the apartment with the easy familiarity of someone who owned it, which he did, and eventually settled on the couch, gesturing for Lena to sit. "We need to go over the plan," he said. Lena sat in the armchair across from him, maintaining distance. "I thought the plan was simple. I show up, Isabella sees me, she makes her move, and your people stop her. That's the outline. The details matter." Marco leaned forward, his expression serious. "The auction is at the Castellano estate. Vincent Castellano is hosting. He's the one backing Isabella's play against me. The location isn't neutral ground. It's enemy territory." "Then why are we going?" "Because Vincent wants to believe he's won. He thinks having the event at his estate gives him control, makes him untouchable, but it also means everyone who matters will be in one place. When Isabella moves against us, Vincent either supports her openly, which forces his hand and gives me cause to respond, or he tries to maintain plausible deniability, which splits their alliance. Lena absorbed this, trying to follow the chess game being played with her life as one of the pieces. And if they just shoot us the moment we arrive? They won't. Too many witnesses, too much exposure. Vincent's entire power base relies on maintaining the illusion of legitimacy. He can't massacre guests at a charity event. Marco's smile was cold, but he can look the other way if something tragic happens in a more private moment. Which is why you don't leave my side. Not for a second. What about the bathroom? Female security will accompany you. I've hired 3 women, former military, who will be positioned as guests. You'll meet them tomorrow. He pulled out his phone and showed her photos of 3 hard-faced women who looked like they could kill someone with a cocktail napkin. They'll be watching you even when I'm not. The next day passed in a blur of preparation that felt surreal. The 3 security women, Diane, Sarah, and Torres, arrived mid-morning and spent hours drilling Lena on the layout of the Castellano estate, which they'd somehow obtained blueprints for. They showed her exit routes, safe rooms, and the positions where Marco's people would be stationed. If shooting starts, you drop, Diane said. She was the oldest of the 3, maybe 40, with scars on her knuckles and eyes that had seen too much. You don't run. You don't try to help. You make yourself the smallest target possible and you wait for us to come get you. And if you can't get to me, then you use this. Torres handed Lena a small device that looked like a car key fob. Press the button, hold for 3 seconds. It sends your location to every one of our people and triggers a full extraction protocol. But Lena, Torres's expression was grave. You only use it if you're about to die, because the extraction protocol means Marco's people come in loud and violent, and there's no walking back from that. It turns the auction into a war zone. Lena closed her fingers around the device, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to hold so much potential destruction. What if Isabella doesn't make her move at the auction? What if she waits? She won't wait, Sarah said. She was the youngest, maybe 30, with a British accent and the controlled movements of someone trained in hand-to-hand combat. We've made sure she knows you'll be there. We've made sure she knows you matter to Marco. Her ego won't let her pass up the chance to destroy you both in Vincent's house, proving she's worthy of the alliance. She'll move. Question is whether it's subtle or obvious. The afternoon brought a stylist who did things to Lena's hair and makeup that transformed her from invisible waitress to someone who might plausibly belong in Marco's world. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a stranger, polished, elegant, confident. The armor of appearance Claudia had spoken of. Marco arrived at 6 to pick her up, dressed in a tuxedo that probably cost more than a year of Lena's old rent. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her, and for a moment something unguarded crossed his face. You look... He paused, seeming to search for words. You look like you belong. I don't belong, Lena said quietly. I'm just wearing a costume. Everyone there will be wearing costumes. The difference is you know yours is fake. He offered his arm. Ready? Lena thought about the device in her evening bag. The security women who'd follow at a discreet distance. The man whose life she'd saved, and who was now using her as bait to end a war. Ready felt like the wrong word, but she took Marco's arm anyway. Let's go. The drive to the Castellano estate took 40 minutes, heading north out of the city into areas where properties were measured in acres rather than square feet. The estate itself was exactly what Lena had expected. Sprawling mansion, manicured grounds, circular drive filled with luxury cars that cost more than most houses. Valets in crisp uniforms opened doors while security in expensive suits checked names against lists. Remember, Marco murmured as they approached the entrance, you're my guest. You belong here. Anyone who suggests otherwise is wrong. The interior of the mansion was obscene in its opulence. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, art that Lena suspected was museum quality hanging casually on walls. The main ballroom had been set up for the auction, with rows of chairs facing a small stage and bar areas positioned around the perimeter. People in evening wear clustered in groups, their conversations creating a low hum of wealth and power. Lena felt every eye in the room track their entrance, felt the weight of assessment, curiosity, and in some cases, naked hostility. She kept her chin up, her hand light on Marco's arm, and tried to channel the confidence the dress and makeup suggested she possessed. Marco Bellucci. The voice came from their left, smooth and dangerous. "I'm surprised you accepted the invitation." Vincent Castellano was shorter than Lena had expected, maybe 5'9", but he radiated the kind of authority that had nothing to do with physical size. Silver hair, expensive suit, eyes like chips of ice. He looked like a banker or a CEO, which was probably the point. The gun he undoubtedly carried would be as well-tailored as his jacket. "Vincent?" Marco's tone was cordial, almost friendly. "Thank you for hosting. Beautiful venue." "Yes, well, I believe in supporting worthy causes." Vincent's gaze slid to Lena, assessing and dismissive in the same glance. "And who's your companion? I don't believe we've met." "Lena Park," Marco said before she could speak. "Lena, this is Vincent Castellano, our generous host." Lena extended her hand, forcing herself to meet Vincent's eyes. His handshake was perfunctory, already dismissing her as irrelevant. Which was fine. She'd spent her whole life being dismissed. At least now she knew it was strategic. "Charming," Vincent said in a tone that suggested the opposite. "Do enjoy the auction. I'm sure you'll find the lots educational." He moved away into the crowd, and Lena felt Marco's arm tense under her hand. "He knows something," Marco said quietly. "Vincent's not a good actor. He's too pleased with himself." Before Lena could respond, she saw her. Isabella Bellucci stood near the bar, resplendent in a red dress that probably cost more than a car, diamonds at her throat and wrists catching the light. She was laughing at something a silver-haired man was saying, her hand on his arm, playing the role of charming guest perfectly. But when her eyes found Lena across the room, the laughter died. For 3 heartbeats, Isabella simply stared, her expression cycling through surprise, recognition, and finally cold fury. Then the social mask slammed back into place and she was smiling again, but her eyes never left Lena. "She sees you," Marco murmured. "Now we wait and see how patient she is." The auction started 20 minutes later. Lena sat beside Marco in the 3rd row, hyper-aware of everything around her. Diane was positioned 2 rows back, apparently fascinated by her phone. Sarah stood near the bar, chatting with a man who clearly thought he was charming her. Torres had disappeared, but Lena trusted she was somewhere close. The lots were exactly what she'd expected. Art, jewelry, exclusive experiences that the wealthy bid on to demonstrate their wealth and support causes that made them feel philanthropic. Lena watched numbers climb into 6 and 7 figures with a detachment born from unreality. This wasn't her world. Would never be her world, no matter how expensive the dress or how carefully styled her hair. Halfway through the auction, Isabella made her first move. She stood, smoothing her dress, and walked past Marco's row on her way to the restrooms. As she passed, she leaned down, her voice pitched for only him to hear. "She's very pretty, Marco. I hope she's worth what's coming." Marco didn't respond, didn't even turn his head, but Lena felt his hand find hers, squeezing once. Reassurance or warning, she couldn't tell. 10 minutes later, Lena's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Ladies' room, now. Come alone or more people die than just you." Lena showed the message to Marco, whose jaw tightened. "It's a trap." Obviously. Lena stood, keeping her movements casual. "But she's not going to stop. We knew this was coming." "Not in the bathroom. Too public. Too many witnesses." But Marco was already signaling to Diane, who immediately rose and followed as Lena made her way toward the restrooms. The ladies' room was down a marble hallway, past several closed doors that probably led to offices or private rooms. As Lena approached, a woman she didn't recognize stepped out of one of those closed doors. "Miss Park, Mrs. Bellucci would like a word. In private." The woman's hand was inside her jacket, the message clear. Diane appeared at Lena's elbow. "She's not going anywhere without—" The gunshot was shockingly loud in the enclosed hallway. Diane went down, blood blooming across her shoulder, her return fire going wide as she fell. The woman grabbed Lena's arm, yanking her toward the open door while another armed figure appeared to block Diane from following. Lena's training from the day before evaporated in the face of actual violence. She stumbled through the doorway into what looked like a study. Dark wood paneling, heavy desk, walls lined with books that probably had never been read. Isabella stood by the window, no longer bothering with her social mask. "Close the door," Isabella said calmly. The woman who'd shot Diane complied. then positioned herself in front of it, armed, alert, professional. "This is cozy," Lena said, surprised her voice was steady. "Private conversation usually doesn't require gunfire. Your bodyguard will live, assuming my people get medical attention to her in time." Isabella moved closer, circling Lena like a predator. "I wanted to meet the woman who thinks she can take my place. I'm not trying to take anything. I'm just trying to survive. By attaching yourself to my husband? By playing the innocent victim he feels obligated to protect?" Isabella's laugh was harsh. "I know that game. I invented it, and I'm not letting some waitress nobody destroy what I built." "What you built?" Lena's fear was crystallizing into anger. "You mean the marriage you're trying to destroy? The alliance with Vincent that's designed to kill Marco?" "I mean my life." Isabella's voice went cold. 20 years I gave him. 20 years of being the perfect wife, the perfect hostess, looking the other way when he brought his business home. And how does he repay me? By deciding he wants out. By making me the villain in his redemption story. So you decided to kill him. I decided to take what's mine. Marco's empire, his money, his respect, I earned all of it. If he thinks he can just walk away, hand me a divorce settlement and send me off to spend my days shopping and getting plastic surgery, he's wrong. Isabella pulled a gun from somewhere in the folds of her dress, pointing it casually at Lena's chest. "And you're the message that tells him I'm serious." The door behind Lena exploded inward. Marco came through first, gun already drawn, 2 of his men flanking him. The woman who'd been guarding the door was down before Lena fully processed what was happening. Marco's shot precise and professional. Isabella swung her weapon toward Marco, but Lena was already moving. Training she didn't know she had kicked in, some primitive instinct for survival that didn't care about consequences. She grabbed Isabella's wrist, yanking it upward just as the gun discharged. Plaster rained down from the ceiling. Then chaos erupted in earnest. More gunfire, though, from where Lena couldn't tell. Marco's men returning fire. The sound of breaking glass. Someone screaming. Isabella wrenched free of Lena's grip and backhanded her hard enough to send her stumbling into the desk. "You stupid little bitch," Isabella snarled. "You really think you matter to him? You're just another project, another lost cause he thinks he can save to feel better about himself." Lena's hand found something on the desk, a heavy crystal paperweight. She didn't think, didn't plan, just threw it with all the strength born from years of carrying heavy trays and working double shifts. It caught Isabella in the temple, and the older woman went down hard, her gun skittering across the floor. Marco was there instantly, kicking the weapon away, his own gun trained on his estranged wife. "Stay down." But Isabella was laughing, blood trickling from the cut on her forehead. "You're too late, Marco. Vincent's people are already moving. You think I came here alone? You think this was just about killing you and your little pet?" The explosion rattled the windows. Distant but powerful, coming from somewhere deeper in the mansion. Screams erupted from the ballroom, the controlled chaos of an auction replaced by genuine panic. "The main gathering," one of Marco's men said urgently. "They've blocked the exits. It's a massacre." Marco's face went hard. He looked at Lena, something like regret in his eyes. "I need to get those people out. Can you—" "Go," Lena said. "I'm fine." She wasn't fine. Her face throbbed where Isabella had hit her, her hands were shaking, and the body of the woman Marco had shot lay 5 feet away, eyes staring at nothing. But Marco needed to help the innocent people caught in the crossfire of his war, and Lena could handle one injured woman. Marco and his men disappeared into the hallway. Lena stood over Isabella, who had stopped laughing and now just looked tired. "He'll never love you," Isabella said. "He doesn't love anyone. Just his empire, his control, his image." "I don't care if he loves me," Lena replied. "I just want to live." More gunfire from the direction of the ballroom, shouts, the sound of multiple people running. The estate had become a war zone, exactly what Torres had warned would happen. But this wasn't Marco's extraction protocol. This was Isabella and Vincent's endgame, forcing a confrontation that would leave one side destroyed. Sarah appeared in the doorway, blood on her dress, but moving efficiently. "We need to move. Vincent's people are sweeping the building, killing anyone connected to Marco. We've got maybe 3 minutes before they reach this wing." "Diane?" Lena asked. "Torres got her out. She'll make it."
Sarah's eyes flicked to Isabella on the floor.
What about her? Lena looked at the woman who'd tried to have her killed, who'd orchestrated this entire nightmare because she couldn't accept that her marriage was over. Part of her, the part that had spent 3 years staying invisible to stay safe, wanted to leave Isabella here for Vincent's people to find. Let them deal with Marco's estranged wife. Let her face the consequences of her alliance. But Lena had spent too many years being invisible, being nobody, to become someone who left injured women to die. "Help me get her up," Lena said. Sarah stared at her. "You're joking." "Do I look like I'm joking? She's Marco's wife. That means she's leverage, information, or at minimum proof of what Vincent was planning." Lena grabbed Isabella's arm, hauling her to her feet. The older woman was barely conscious, dead weight that nearly dragged Lena down. "Now help me before those 3 minutes run out." They half carried, half dragged Isabella through the mansion's back corridors, following Sarah's lead through servant passages and private hallways. Behind them, the sounds of violence grew closer. Gunfire. Breaking glass. Someone screaming orders. They emerged into a kitchen where staff huddled under steel prep tables, terrified civilians caught in a war they didn't understand. Sarah led them through and out a service entrance that opened onto the estate's grounds. The night air was sharp with smoke. Parts of the mansion were burning, flames visible through upper-story windows. Sirens wailed in the distance. Police, fire department, probably federal agents too. An event like this couldn't be contained or covered up. Whatever happened tonight would have consequences far beyond Marco and Isabella's personal war. A black SUV peeled around the corner, Torres at the wheel. She took one look at Isabella's semi-conscious form and swore in Spanish, but she didn't argue. They loaded Isabella into the back seat, Lena climbing in beside her while Sarah took the front. "Where's Marco?" Lena demanded. "Still inside," Torres said grimly, accelerating toward the estate's gates. "He's getting the civilians out." "But Lena, Vincent's dead. Killed in the initial explosion. Someone used it as cover to take him out. Without Vincent, the Castellano family's alliance with Isabella is broken. This is over." "Who killed Vincent?" Torres's eyes met Lena's in the rearview mirror. "Does it matter?" It did matter. It mattered who had the power to kill a Mafia boss during his own event in his own home, while security swarmed everywhere. It mattered whether that person was an enemy or an ally. It mattered whether Marco had planned this outcome or if he was as blindsided as everyone else. But before Lena could press the question, her phone rang. "Marco, are you safe?" His voice was rough, edged with something that might have been fear. "Yes. We're clear of the estate." "Marco, what happened? Who killed Vincent?" "I did." 2 words, said with absolute finality. "Isabella gave me the opening with her attack. Vincent's people were confused, not sure who to protect. I made a choice. It's done." Lena looked at Isabella, slumped against the SUV's window, beaten and broken, but alive. She'd allied with Vincent to destroy Marco, and Marco had responded by eliminating the threat at its source. Brutal. Efficient. Exactly what Lena should have expected from a man who'd built an empire on violence. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we disappear until the authorities sort through the mess. FBI will be crawling over this for weeks, but without Vincent or Isabella making accusations, the narrative defaults to a business dispute gone wrong. Tragic, but not our problem." A pause. "Lena, you saved my life tonight. Again. That makes twice now." "I didn't save you, I just stopped Isabella from shooting you." "You also chose to bring her with you instead of leaving her for Vincent's people. That was smart. She's valuable leverage." Marco's voice softened. "But you didn't have to do it. You could have left her. Most people would have." "I'm not most people," Lena said quietly. "I'm learning that." "Yes," Marco agreed. "You are. We'll talk more when I get back. Torres knows where to take you. Stay safe." He hung up before Lena could respond. She sat in the back of the SUV, covered in other people's blood, an unconscious Mafia wife beside her, fleeing a massacre that had killed dozens of people. This was her life now. This was what happened when you saved a stranger with 6 words on a napkin. Torres drove them to a different safe house, this one outside the city entirely. A farmhouse that looked abandoned but had state-of-the-art security and medical facilities in the converted barn. A doctor was already there when they arrived, taking charge of Isabella, while Torres checked Lena for injuries. "You did good tonight," Torres said, cleaning a cut on Lena's cheek that she hadn't realized was there. "Kept your head, made smart choices, survived. That's more than most people manage their first time in real combat." "It didn't feel smart," Lena said. "It felt like drowning." "That's what combat is. Controlled drowning. You just keep swimming until you hit shore." Torres met her eyes. "But Lena, you need to understand something. Tonight changed you. You pulled a trigger, sort of. You made a choice to engage instead of hide. You can't come back from that. The woman who walked into that auction isn't the woman sitting here now." Lena thought about the paperweight hitting Isabella's temple, the way she'd grabbed for the gun without thinking, the cold calculation that had made her bring Isabella along as leverage. Torres was right. Something fundamental had shifted. She'd been bait, but she'd become a fighter. The transformation had cost her something she could never name but would always miss. Her innocence, maybe, or her illusions about who she could be. Marco arrived 3 hours later, appearing in the farmhouse kitchen where Lena sat nursing coffee and trying not to think about the bodies she'd seen. He was still in his tuxedo, though it was torn and stained now. He looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. "The FBI has the estate locked down," he said, pouring himself coffee and sitting across from her. 37 dead, including Vincent. "They're calling it a terrorist attack for now, but that won't hold. Eventually they'll figure out it was a power play gone wrong. Will they come after you?" "They'll try. But without Isabella or Vincent to testify, without clear evidence linking me to the violence, they'll have a hard time making anything stick." He studied her face, taking in the bruising and cuts. "How are you?" "I don't know," Lena admitted. "I keep thinking about all those people at the auction, just there for charity, for social climbing, whatever. And they got caught in our war." "Not our war. Isabella's, Vincent's. I didn't start this." "But you finished it." Lena held his gaze. "You killed Vincent. During the chaos, you made your move and eliminated him. That was always the plan, wasn't it? Use Isabella's attack as cover?" Marco didn't deny it. "Vincent was a problem that needed solving. Isabella gave me the opportunity. I took it." "And the others who died? The civilians? Collateral damage in a war I didn't choose." His voice went hard. "Don't make me the villain here, Lena. Isabella and Vincent would have killed me and everyone associated with me, including you. I did what I had to do to survive." "I'm not calling you a villain," Lena said quietly. "I'm just trying to understand the world I'm in now, the choices I'll have to make." Something shifted in Marco's expression. "You don't have to make any choices. This is over. Isabella's neutralized. Vincent's dead. The threat against you is gone. You can go back. Not to your old life, that's impossible, but to something normal, something safe." Lena laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "There's no going back. Torres was right. I changed tonight. I crossed lines I didn't even know existed. And Marco, I don't want to go back. The invisible waitress who lived paycheck to paycheck, who was too scared to take any risks? She's gone. I killed her tonight when I chose to fight instead of hide." "So what do you want?" It was the question Lena had been avoiding, the one that had no easy answer. What did she want? Safety was impossible. Invisibility was gone. The simple life she'd once led felt like a stranger's memory. "I want what you promised," she said finally. "A place in your world. Not as bait or a victim or a project you're protecting out of obligation. An actual place. With actual power." Marco studied her for a long moment. "That's not a small ask. My world is built on loyalty, on trust earned through blood and time. You've proven yourself tonight, but one night doesn't make you one of us." "Then what does?" "Time, choices. Proving you can handle what comes with power, the violence, the moral compromises, the weight of people's lives in your hands." He leaned forward. "Lena, I can give you that chance, but you need to understand what you're accepting. Once you're in, you're in. There's no retirement plan, no walking away when it gets hard. This life will mark you in ways that never fade." "I'm already marked," Lena said. "The moment I wrote those 6 words on a napkin, I was marked. At least this way, I choose how the story ends." Marco smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, it looked genuine.
All right. Then we do this right. You work for me, but not as hired help, as a partner in the legitimate businesses I'm building.
I've been looking to move away from the old ways, clean up my operations. You help me do that, you earn your place. Why would you want to go legitimate? Because I'm tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of wars like tonight, and because... He paused. Because you reminded me that there are people who do the right thing without calculating the profit margin. I'd like to be that person again, or at least build something that person would be proud of. It was the most honest thing Marco had said to her, and Lena found herself believing him. Maybe it was naive. Maybe she was seeing what she wanted to see, but the alternative was going back to a half-life of invisibility and fear, and she'd already decided that wasn't an option. Partners then, Lena said, extending her hand across the kitchen table. But Marco, if you ever use me as bait again without full disclosure, our partnership is over. Fair enough. He shook her hand, his grip firm and warm. Welcome to the family business, Lena Park. May we both survive what comes next. The farmhouse became their headquarters for the next week, while the investigation into the Castellano estate massacre consumed the news cycle. Lena watched the coverage obsessively, seeing her own grainy image in the background of security footage. A woman in a midnight blue dress, her hand on Marco Bellucci's arm as they entered the auction. The media couldn't identify her. Nobody could. She was still invisible to everyone except the people who mattered. Isabella remained unconscious for 3 days. The head injury from Lena's thrown paperweight more severe than anyone had initially realized. The doctor, a man named Reeves, who asked no questions and expected no answers, monitored her condition with clinical detachment while Torres and Sarah rotated guard shifts outside her room. She's stable, Reeves told Marco on the morning of the 4th day. Brain swelling's down. She should wake soon. Whether she'll have permanent damage, I can't say yet. Lena stood in the doorway of Isabella's makeshift hospital room, watching the woman who'd tried to have her killed breathe slowly beneath white sheets. In sleep, Isabella looked less like a threat and more like what she actually was, a woman in her 40s who'd made catastrophic choices and lost everything. Do you feel sorry for her? Marco asked quietly from behind Lena. I don't know what I feel, Lena admitted. She tried to kill us both, but she also spent 20 years in your world, doing what she thought she had to do to survive. I understand that better now than I did a week ago. She didn't have to survive. She chose comfort over freedom, power over peace. Those were her decisions. Marco's voice was hard. Don't mistake understanding for forgiveness, Lena. Isabella would kill you right now if she had the chance. I know, but that doesn't mean I have to become her. Marco was silent for a moment. Then he said, No, you don't. That's what makes you different. Isabella woke that afternoon, her eyes opening slowly to focus on the ceiling before tracking to where Lena sat in a chair by the window. Recognition came gradually, followed by confusion, then cold fury. You should have left me, Isabella said, her voice rough from disuse. Would have been smarter. Probably, Lena agreed. But I'm learning that smart and right aren't always the same thing. How noble! Isabella tried to sit up, then gasped as pain lanced through her head. Where am I? Somewhere safe. Marco's keeping you alive despite the fact that you orchestrated a massacre to kill him. Lena set down the book she'd been pretending to read. The FBI is looking for you, by the way. They think you died in the explosion. We haven't corrected that assumption. Because I'm more valuable alive and hidden. Isabella's laugh was bitter. I know how Marco thinks. He'll use me as leverage against what's left of Vincent's organization, proof that I was the architect of the attack. He'll trade my testimony for immunity or bury me so deep nobody ever finds the body. Either way, I'm finished. That's up to him, not me. Is it? Isabella's eyes were sharp despite the pain clearly evident in her expression. You're sitting here playing guard. You came to see me specifically. Marco trusts you enough to leave you alone with his greatest liability. That means you have power now, whether you realize it or not. Lena stood, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I'll tell Marco you're awake. Wait! Isabella's voice stopped her at the door. I need to know something. That night at the restaurant, when you warned him, why? You didn't know Marco. You had no reason to risk yourself for a stranger, so why did you do it? Lena turned back, studying the woman who'd built her entire life on transactions and calculated risks. Because watching people die when I could prevent it seemed worse than the consequences of getting involved. I was wrong about the consequences, but I wasn't wrong about the choice. You were absolutely wrong about the choice, Isabella said flatly. Look where it got you, trapped in Marco's world, marked by his enemies, forced to become someone you never wanted to be. You think that's better than staying invisible? Yes, Lena said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I do. She left before Isabella could respond, finding Marco in the farmhouse's converted office, reviewing documents with a man Lena didn't recognize. The stranger was perhaps 60, with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Lena, this is Robert Chen, Marco said. My attorney. Robert, this is my new business partner, Lena Park. Robert's eyebrows rose slightly, but he extended his hand with professional courtesy. Ms. Park, Marco's told me about your circumstances. I've drawn up the necessary paperwork to formalize your position in several of his legitimate enterprises. Lena shook his hand, then looked at Marco. What enterprises? 3 restaurants, a shipping company, and a commercial real estate firm. Marco gestured to the papers spread across the desk. All completely legal, all currently underperforming because I haven't had time to manage them properly. You'll start as a consultant, transition to operations manager within 6 months if things work out. I was a waitress, Lena said slowly. I don't know anything about running businesses. You know how restaurants work from the ground up. You understand what makes good service, good food, good customer experience. The rest you can learn. Marco's expression was serious. This isn't charity, Lena. I need someone I can trust to handle the legitimate side while I work on extricating myself from the less legitimate operations. Someone who hasn't been corrupted by the old ways of doing business. Robert cleared his throat. If I may, Marco, this is highly irregular. Ms. Park has no experience, no credentials, no track record in business management. Your other partners will object strenuously. My other partners can object all they want. This is my decision. Marco's voice carried the weight of command that Lena was beginning to recognize as his default mode when challenged. Lena saved my life twice. She's earned this opportunity. Earning an opportunity and being qualified for it are different things, Robert said carefully. I'm not questioning Ms. Park's character. I'm questioning whether putting her in charge of millions of dollars worth of businesses is wise. Then help her become qualified, Marco said. That's what I'm paying you for. Find her mentors, set up training, whatever she needs to succeed. But the decision is made. After Robert left, still clearly unconvinced, but too professional to argue further, Lena sat across from Marco in the office that smelled of old wood and newer coffee. You didn't ask me if I wanted this, she said. Do you want it? Lena thought about her studio apartment, her aching feet after double shifts, the constant calculation of whether she could afford both groceries and electricity this week. She thought about being invisible, being nobody, being safe in a way that felt increasingly like death by inches. Yes, she admitted. But Marco, I don't want to fail. I don't want to prove Robert right, that I'm just some waitress in over her head. Then don't fail. Marco's smile was slight but genuine. Lena, you survived a gunfight, outmaneuvered Isabella Bellucci, and made strategic decisions under pressure that saved lives. Running a restaurant is going to be easier than that. Running 3 restaurants plus a shipping company and real estate firm. Details. Marco pulled out a folder, opening it to reveal organizational charts and financial statements. We'll start with the restaurants. The shipping company is actually profitable and runs itself. Real estate is mostly property management, which we have people for. But the restaurants, those need someone who understands the business from the inside. Over the next hour, Marco walked Lena through the basics of his legitimate empire. The 3 restaurants were all in Little Italy, all struggling with the same problems: outdated menus, poor management, staff turnover. The shipping company moved legal goods up and down the East Coast. The real estate firm owned and managed 40 properties, mostly commercial spaces leased to small businesses. It's not as complicated as it looks, Marco said, seeing Lena's overwhelmed expression. Business is business. Provide value, manage costs, treat people fairly. The rest is just paperwork and patience. And when your less legitimate partners try to interfere, they won't. Not if I make it clear that these businesses are off limits. Marco's expression hardened.
I'm drawing a line, Lena. This side is clean. That side is the old way. And the old way is ending, one piece at a time. They'll fight you on that. Let them. I've been preparing for this transition for 2 years. Vincent's death accelerated the timeline, but the plan was always to legitimize as much as possible. He met her eyes. You're part of that plan now, the face of the new direction, someone who has no connection to the old business, no debts to the old families.
Lena understood then what Marco was really offering. Not just a job or a partnership, but a shield. By putting her in charge of the legitimate operations, he was creating separation between his criminal past and his legal future. If investigations came, if prosecutors tried to build cases, they'd find Lena Park, former waitress with no criminal record, running clean businesses by the books. I'm cover, she said. You're legitimate, Marco corrected. There's a difference. Everything you do will be completely legal. That's the point. I need someone who can't be compromised, who won't fall back on old methods when problems arise. Someone who solves things the right way. And if the right way doesn't work, then we find another right way. But we don't go backward, Lena. That's the one rule. Whatever you build, it stays clean. The weight of what Marco was asking settled on Lena's shoulders. He wasn't just giving her a job. He was asking her to be the foundation of his redemption, the proof that he could build something legitimate and lasting. It was enormous responsibility for someone who'd been invisible a month ago. But it was also exactly what she'd asked for, a place in his world with actual power, the chance to be somebody. I'll need help, Lena said finally. Training, mentors, people who know what they're doing. You'll have it. Robert will set everything up. But Lena, Marco's voice went serious. This has to be real. You can't just be a figurehead. You need to actually run these businesses, make real decisions, take real responsibility. Because if this is going to work, if I'm going to prove I can change, it starts with you proving these businesses can succeed without corruption. No pressure then. Marco's laugh was unexpected and genuine. Welcome to power, Lena Park. It's heavy, it's constant, and it never gets easier. But it's yours now. What you do with it determines who you become. Isabella was moved to a more secure location 3 days later, a private facility that specialized in patients who needed to disappear. Marco visited her before the transfer, and Lena waited outside the room, listening to their voices through the door. You're keeping me alive, Isabella said. That means you still need me. I need you contained, Marco corrected. You're proof of the conspiracy with Vincent, proof that the attack wasn't my doing. Whether that proof ever sees a courtroom depends on how cooperative you are. Cooperative with what? My testimony would destroy me too. Your testimony with immunity would destroy what's left of Vincent's organization and exonerate me completely. You'd serve minimum time for cooperation, probably in a comfortable facility, and when you got out, you'd have access to funds I've set aside. A pause. Or you can refuse and I'll make sure you disappear permanently. Your choice. Silence. Then Isabella's bitter laugh. You always did know how to make an offer I couldn't refuse. Fine, I'll cooperate. But Marco, that girl you've brought into your world, the waitress playing businesswoman, she's going to get hurt. This life destroys people like her. People like her? People who still think there's a difference between right and wrong, who believe good intentions matter. This world will eat her alive. Then I'll make sure it doesn't, Marco said. Unlike you, Isabella, I don't sacrifice the people who trust me. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. When Marco emerged from the room, his expression was unreadable, but Lena saw the tension in his shoulders. She'll testify? Lena asked. She will, in exchange for a deal that keeps her comfortable and alive. Marco started walking toward the farmhouse exit. It's done. Vincent's organization will collapse within months. Isabella will disappear into witness protection, and I'll be clean. Just like that? Just like that. But Marco's voice suggested it wasn't simple at all. 20 years of my life, ending with a deal in a farmhouse and my wife vanishing into a new identity. There should be more ceremony to it. Lena followed him outside, where the late autumn sun was setting over fields that stretched toward distant tree lines. The air smelled clean, untainted by city smoke or the lingering scent of violence. Do you regret it? She asked. The 20 years? The choices?
Marco was quiet for a long moment. I regret that I hurt people who didn't deserve it. I regret that I built an empire on fear instead of respect, but I don't regret surviving, and I don't regret the power to make different choices now. He looked at her. Do you regret writing those 6 words? Lena thought about her studio apartment, her invisible life, the safety of being nobody. She thought about gunfire and blood and terror, about the weight of power settling on her shoulders, about the woman she was becoming in the wreckage of the woman she'd been. No, she said. I don't regret it. I regret that people died. I regret the violence. But I don't regret choosing to act instead of hide. Then we're the same, you and I. Haunted by the cost, but not the choice. Marco smiled slightly. Welcome to the burden of power, partner. They returned to the city 2 weeks after the Castellano estate massacre. The FBI investigation was ongoing but losing momentum. With Vincent dead, Isabella missing, and no clear evidence tying Marco to the violence, the narrative was settling into a tragic escalation between rival families. Several of Vincent's former associates had been arrested. Others had fled. The power vacuum was being filled by younger, more cautious operators who had no interest in continuing a war that had cost so many lives. Marco's apartment in Manhattan was nothing like Lena had expected. Clean lines, minimal furniture, walls of windows overlooking the city. It looked like a showroom, impersonal and cold, the home of someone who never really lived there. I'm rarely here, Marco confirmed when he saw her expression. Most of my time is spent managing problems, meeting obligations. This is just where I sleep occasionally. It's like a hotel room. Exactly, which is why I'm selling it. He gestured at the packed boxes stacked near the door. Fresh start requires fresh space. I've bought a brownstone in Brooklyn, near Prospect Park. Actual neighborhood, actual neighbors. The kind of place where people live instead of hide. Lena moved to the windows, looking out at the Manhattan skyline glittering in the twilight. From up here, the city looked clean and orderly, all the violence and desperation hidden beneath beautiful architecture and careful planning. When do I start with the restaurants? She asked. Tomorrow, if you want. Robert's arranged for a mentor, a woman named Sarah Winters, ran a successful restaurant group for 20 years before retiring. She's agreed to work with you for 6 months. Marco joined her at the window. But Lena, there's something we need to address first. The seriousness in his tone made Lena turn to face him. What? Your safety. The immediate threat from Isabella is gone, but you're visible now, connected to me. That makes you a target for anyone who wants to hurt me or test my defenses. Marco's expression was grim. I can provide security, but I can't guarantee your safety. Not completely. And I need you to understand that before you commit to this partnership. I understood that when I agreed, Lena said. I'm not naive, Marco. I know what being in your world means. Knowing intellectually and living it daily are different things. You'll have bodyguards following you. Your home will need security systems. You'll have to vet everyone you meet, question every new friendship. Wonder if people want to know you or know me through you. He paused. It's isolating, exhausting, and it doesn't end. Neither did being invisible, Lena said quietly. That was isolating too. At least this way, I'm isolated with purpose instead of fear. Marco studied her for a long moment, and Lena saw something shift in his expression. Respect, maybe. Or recognition that she'd made her choice with full understanding of the cost. All right, he said. Then we do this properly. Tomorrow you meet Sarah Winters and start learning the restaurant business. I'll have security assigned to you by end of day. 2 people, rotating shifts, professional but discreet. And Lena, he held her gaze. If you ever feel unsafe, if you ever want out, you tell me. No judgment, no consequences. I'll make sure you're protected and set up somewhere safe. That's my promise. I won't want out, Lena said, surprised by her own certainty. Maybe not now, but check in with yourself regularly. This life has a way of changing people without them noticing until it's too late. The first month was harder than Lena had imagined. Sarah Winters was brilliant but demanding, expecting Lena to absorb information at a pace that left her brain aching. Restaurant management, inventory systems, staff dynamics, food cost percentages, health regulations, customer service philosophy. The sheer volume of knowledge required was overwhelming.
But Lena had spent years watching restaurants from the inside, understanding the rhythm and flow in ways that couldn't be taught from textbooks. When Sarah took her to Marco's struggling restaurants and asked her what she saw, Lena could identify problems immediately. Staff that didn't respect management because management didn't respect them. Menus that tried to be everything to everyone and satisfied nobody. Kitchens laid out inefficiently, wasting steps and time. Dining rooms that felt cold and unwelcoming. "You have good instincts," Sarah admitted after the third restaurant visit. "Now we need to teach you how to fix what you see." The fixes weren't quick or easy. Lena spent 16-hour days working alongside staff, learning their names and their problems, understanding why they showed up late or called in sick or provided mediocre service. She revised menus with the chefs, cutting items that didn't sell and highlighting dishes that showcased their skills. She renegotiated supplier contracts, finding better prices without sacrificing quality. And slowly, incrementally, the restaurants began to improve. Staff turnover decreased. Customer reviews got better. Profit margins crept upward. Marco watched from a distance, checking in weekly, but letting Lena run the operations without interference. Their meetings were brief and professional. Progress reports, problem-solving sessions, strategic planning. He treated her like an actual business partner, not a project or a protege, and Lena found herself rising to meet those expectations. 3 months after taking over the restaurants, Lena sat in her new office, a converted space above one of the Little Italy locations, reviewing financials when Marco appeared in the doorway. "You're making money," he said without preamble. "All 3 locations are profitable for the first time in 2 years." "The staff is making money," Lena corrected. "I just removed the obstacles that were preventing them from doing their jobs properly." Leadership is about removing obstacles. Marco entered the office, glancing at the papers covering her desk. "Sarah says you're a natural, that you have instincts she can't teach." Sarah's being generous. "I'm still learning." "We're all still learning." Marco sat in the chair across from her desk, and Lena noticed the tiredness in his face. He looked older than he had 3 months ago, the weight of his transformation showing in new lines around his eyes. "I wanted to tell you before you heard it elsewhere. The FBI is closing the Castellano investigation. No charges filed against anyone connected to me. Isabella's testimony was enough to shift the narrative." Lena set down her pen. "So it's really over." "The investigation is over. The transition isn't." Marco's expression was complicated. "I've made a lot of enemies over the years, Lena. People who won't care that I'm going legitimate, who'll see it as weakness instead of strength. We need to be prepared for challenges." "What kind of challenges?" "The kind where someone tests my resolve by going after my businesses or my partners." He met her eyes. "I need you to be careful. More careful than you've been. Your security detail says you've been sending them home early, walking alone sometimes." Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I can't live in a bubble, Marco. I need to be able to move freely, interact with staff and customers without armed guards hovering." "I understand that, but you also need to stay alive. Compromise. Keep security close when you're traveling between locations or working late. Send them away when you're in controlled environments with people you trust." He leaned forward. "Please, Lena, I didn't bring you into this world just to watch you die because you wanted independence." The genuine concern in his voice surprised her. Over the past 3 months, their relationship had remained strictly professional, partners working toward a common goal. But this was personal. This was Marco caring about her safety in a way that went beyond protecting an asset. "I'll be more careful," Lena promised. "No more walking home alone after closing." "Thank you." Marco stood, then hesitated. "There's one more thing. I'm hosting a dinner next week. Legitimate business associates, potential investors, some people from the neighborhood who've supported the transition. I'd like you there. As my partner, not as staff." Lena's stomach tightened. "Marco, I don't know how to do that kind of event. The charity auction was different. That was a role. This is real." "This is exactly real. You're a restaurant operator now, a businesswoman. These are the events where partnerships form and deals happen." His smile was slight. "Besides, half the people coming are more nervous than you. They're small business owners, neighborhood fixtures, people who care about their community. You'll fit right in." "What about the other half?" "The other half are investors who only care about profit margins.
Show them your financials for the restaurants and they'll love you. Marco moved toward the door, then paused. Lena, you've proven yourself. The hard part is over. Now you just have to believe it. After he left, Lena sat in her office surrounded by the evidence of her transformation. Financial spreadsheets, staff schedules, supplier contracts, customer feedback forms. 3 months ago, she'd been nobody. Now she was responsible for 3 businesses, 47 employees, and the legitimate face of Marco Bellucci's redemption. The invisible waitress was gone. In her place sat someone new, someone powerful, someone terrified of failing, but more terrified of going back. Lena looked at her reflection in the darkened window, still the same face, still the tired eyes, and wondered if Marco was right. If the hard part was really over, or if she was just now understanding how hard the rest would be. The dinner was scheduled for a Friday evening at Giordano's, which had quietly reopened 6 weeks earlier under new management. Lena's management. She'd spent 2 months transforming the restaurant from the inside out. New menu featuring elevated Italian classics, refreshed dining room that kept the old world charm while feeling less dated, staff she'd personally interviewed and trained. Sal still tended bar, but now he had help and actual days off. The waitstaff earned living wages instead of relying entirely on tips. The kitchen ran efficiently under a chef Lena had poached from a failing restaurant in Soho. It was the flagship of Marco's legitimate empire, proof that transformation was possible. And tonight, it would be full of people judging whether that transformation was real. Lena arrived 3 hours early to oversee preparations. The private dining room in the back had been set up for 20 guests, with a menu she'd designed specifically for this evening. Nothing too fancy, nothing that tried too hard. Just exceptional food executed perfectly, the kind of meal that reminded people why Italian cuisine had conquered the world. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor," Sal observed as Lena made her 4th circuit of the dining room, checking place settings and lighting. "Everything's perfect, Piccola. Relax." "I can't relax. This is—" Lena stopped, unable to articulate the weight of what this dinner meant. Success would prove she belonged in this world. Failure would confirm every doubt Robert Chen and others had voiced about a waitress playing businesswoman. "This is just dinner," Sal said gently. "Good food, good wine, good company. You've done this 1,000 times. I've served it 1,000 times. Hosting is different, only because you're thinking too much." Sal poured her a small glass of wine, pressing it into her hands. "Drink, breathe. Remember that you turned this place from a crime scene into a successful restaurant in 2 months. If you can do that, you can handle one dinner party." Lena sipped the wine, letting its warmth settle her nerves. Sal was right. She'd faced worse than potential investors and neighborhood business owners. She'd faced Isabella Bellucci with a gun. She'd survived a massacre. She could handle dinner. Marco arrived at 6, dressed in a suit that managed to look both expensive and approachable. He took one look at Lena, wearing a simple black dress that Sarah had helped her choose, her hair styled but not overdone, and smiled. "You look perfect," he said. "Professional but not intimidating. Successful but not showy." "Exactly right." "I feel like I'm going to throw up." "That's normal. I still get nervous before important meetings, and I've been doing this for 20 years. Marco moved closer, his voice dropping. "Lena, you've already won. These people are coming because they've heard about what you've done with the restaurants, because they want to be part of something successful. You're not auditioning anymore. You're the show." The first guests arrived at 7. Margaret Chen, who owned a bakery 3 blocks away and supplied bread to all of Lena's restaurants. David Torres, who ran a construction company that had done the renovation work on Giordano's. Others followed, small business owners from the neighborhood, people who'd watched Marco's empire with suspicion for years, but were willing to give his legitimate ventures a chance. They greeted Lena warmly, complimenting the restaurant's transformation, asking questions about her plans for expansion. She found herself relaxing into the conversations, realizing that these people weren't judging her. They were genuinely interested in what she'd built. The investors arrived last, 3 of them representing a fund that specialized in revitalizing struggling restaurants. They were younger than Lena had expected, sharp-eyed and analytical, the kind of people who saw businesses as numbers rather than communities. Ms. Park, the lead investor, a woman named Jennifer Moss, said as they shook hands, "We've been reviewing your financials. Impressive turnaround in a very short time frame. Thank you.
though credit belongs to the staff. I just created conditions for them to succeed.
Modest and strategic. Jennifer's smile was approving.
That's rare in this business. Most operators either take all the credit or deflect all the blame. You seem to understand it's more complex than that. Dinner was served promptly at 8. Lena had positioned herself between Margaret Chen and one of the investors, with Marco at the head of the table playing host with easy charm. The food was exceptional. Antipasti that showcased local ingredients, handmade pasta that melted on the tongue, braised short ribs that had been cooking for hours. The wine flowed freely, conversations overlapping and interweaving in the way of successful dinner parties. Lena found herself actually enjoying the evening. These were her people now, not by birth or background, but by choice and effort. She'd earned her place at this table through work and transformation, and that made it real in ways that inherited position never could be. Midway through the main course, Jennifer Moss tapped her wine glass for attention. The conversations quieted as she stood. "I know this isn't a formal business meeting," Jennifer said, "but I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge what Lena has accomplished here. When our fund reviewed Marco's restaurant portfolio 6 months ago, we saw struggling businesses with potential but no clear path to profitability. Now we see efficient operations with engaged staff and growing customer bases. That transformation doesn't happen by accident. It happens because someone had vision and the skill to execute it." She raised her glass toward Lena. "To vision and execution. May this be just the beginning." The table echoed the toast, and Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks. But beneath the embarrassment was something else. Pride. She'd earned this recognition through 16-hour days and difficult decisions, through learning and failing and trying again. Nobody had given it to her. She'd taken it. After dinner, as guests lingered over espresso and dessert, Marco pulled Lena aside into the restaurant's main dining room, now empty and quiet. "You did well tonight," he said.
"Jennifer's fund is going to invest. She told me during cocktails. They want to back the expansion of the restaurant group."
Lena's heart stuttered. "Expansion?" "2 new locations, one in Brooklyn, one in Queens. Similar model to what you've done here. Neighborhood restaurants with excellent food and fair labor practices. Jennifer thinks we can build a chain of 20 locations over 5 years. Marco's expression was serious. "But only if you're willing to take it on. This would be your project, Lena. Your empire to build." The word empire hung between them, weighted with everything it meant in Marco's world. Power, responsibility. The kind of success that made you a target, but also the kind of success that meant you'd become somebody impossible to ignore or erase. "I want it," Lena said. "But Marco, I need something from you first. Name it. Complete separation. If I'm building this restaurant empire, it has to be genuinely clean. No money from your old operations, no favors from people with criminal connections, no shortcuts that compromise the legitimacy." Lena held his gaze. "I know that limits our options. I know it makes growth slower, but if we're doing this, we're doing it right. All the way right." Something shifted in Marco's expression. "That's not a small ask. Some of my investors have complicated backgrounds. Refusing their money means refusing significant capital. Then we find other investors. Clean ones. People like Jennifer's fund." Lena's voice was firm. "You said you wanted to go legitimate. This is what that actually means. Not just moving money around to look clean, but actually being clean. Building something that can survive scrutiny because there's nothing to find." Marco was quiet for a long moment, and Lena could see him wrestling with the implications. Truly going legitimate meant cutting ties with people who'd been allies for decades. It meant slower growth, more vulnerability, less access to the resources that had always been available to him. It meant choosing a harder path because it was the right one. "All right," Marco said finally. "Complete separation, clean money only. We build this the right way, even if it takes longer." He extended his hand. "Partners in legitimacy, not just in name." Lena shook his hand, and the gesture felt like a promise. Like the final severing of the invisible waitress she'd been from the businesswoman she was becoming. Like choosing her future instead of accepting what others thought she deserved. The next 6 months blurred together in a frenzy of activity. Lena worked with Jennifer's fund to secure financing for the expansion, presenting business plans and financial projections with a confidence that still sometimes surprised her. She scouted locations with Sarah Winters, looking for neighborhoods that needed good restaurants, and had communities that would support them. She interviewed staff, negotiated leases, designed menus. The Brooklyn location opened first, in a renovated space near the waterfront that had once been a warehouse. Lena called it Stella's after her mother and designed it to be the kind of place where families could celebrate and couples could have quiet dinners and neighborhood regulars could gather at the bar. The opening night was chaotic and perfect, with a line out the door and every table full. Marco attended, standing at the back of the dining room watching Lena work the room, greeting customers and checking on tables. When she finally had a moment to breathe, she found him smiling. "Your mother would be proud," he said quietly. Lena felt tears prick her eyes. She'd be terrified. She spent her whole life teaching me to stay invisible, stay safe. This is the opposite of everything she wanted for me. Maybe. Or maybe she wanted you to survive and she taught you the tools she knew. You just found better tools. Marco's expression was thoughtful. Survival looks different depending on the world you're in. Your mother survived her world. You're surviving yours. The truth of that settled in Lena's chest. She'd spent so long thinking she was betraying her mother's lessons by becoming visible, by taking risks, by building power. But maybe she was actually honoring those lessons by adapting them to her reality. Her mother had taught her to survive. Lena was just doing it in a world her mother couldn't have imagined. The Queens location opened 3 months later, and by then Lena had a system. She'd assembled a team of managers she trusted, people who shared her vision of what restaurants could be. She'd developed relationships with suppliers who valued consistency and quality. She'd built a reputation in the industry as someone who ran tight operations and treated staff with respect. She'd become somebody. The transformation wasn't without challenges. Some of Marco's old associates resented his shift to legitimacy, seeing it as weakness or betrayal. Twice, Lena's restaurants were targeted, once with vandalism, once with a harassment campaign aimed at staff. Marco dealt with those threats swiftly and decisively, making it clear that his legitimate businesses were off-limits. "They're testing boundaries," he explained after the second incident, "seeing if I'll revert to old methods when pushed. When I don't, when I handle things through legal channels and proper security, they'll accept the new reality. And if they don't accept it, then they'll find themselves on the wrong side of law enforcement that I'm now cooperating with instead of evading." Marco's smile was cold. "Going legitimate doesn't mean going soft, Lena. It just means choosing different weapons." A year after the Castellano estate massacre, Lena stood in Giordano's during the dinner rush, watching her staff move with practiced efficiency through a completely full dining room. Every table occupied, the bar 3 deep with people waiting for seats, the kitchen humming with controlled chaos. This was success. This was proof that transformation was possible. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marco. "Can you meet me at the corner booth? Need to discuss something." Lena made her way through the crowded restaurant, nodding to regulars and checking briefly with her floor manager. Marco sat in the same corner booth where she'd served him wine a lifetime ago, where she'd placed a napkin with 6 words that changed everything. "This feels familiar," Lena said, sliding into the seat across from him. "That's intentional." Marco had a folder on the table, official-looking documents visible inside. "I wanted to have this conversation here, where it started." "What conversation?" "The one about endings and beginnings." Marco opened the folder, revealing legal papers covered in dense text. "These are transfer documents. They give you majority ownership of the restaurant group, all 5 locations, plus the 2 we're opening next year. Complete control, complete authority." Lena's breath caught. "Marco, I can't. That's millions of dollars in assets. Why would you?" "Because you built it. Because these restaurants are successful because of your vision and your work, not because of my money or my name." Marco's expression was serious. "I'm keeping minority ownership, enough to maintain investment ties, but operational control, strategic direction, profits, that's all yours. You've earned it." "This is too much." "It's exactly right." Marco leaned forward. "Lena, a year ago I told you I wanted to go legitimate. You made that possible. You showed me what it looks like to build something clean and successful, to create value without corruption. The restaurants are proof that it works, but they're your proof, not mine. You should own them." Lena looked at the documents, her mind struggling to process what Marco was offering. Complete ownership, her name on the deeds and the bank accounts, power that was genuinely hers, not borrowed or conditional. "There's a catch," she said. "There has to be." "No catch, just a request." Marco smiled slightly. "Keep doing what you're doing. Keep building. Keep proving that legitimacy can be profitable and sustainable. Because, Lena, what you've created here is more than restaurants. It's a blueprint for how people like me can change. Other operators are watching. Other families are taking notes. You're showing them a different path. That's a lot of pressure. You've been carrying that pressure for a year. Now you'll just get the rewards that go with it." Marco pushed the folder toward her. "Take some time. Review the documents with Robert." "But Lena, this isn't charity, and it's not a gift. It's recognition of value you created. Own that." After Marco left, Lena sat alone in the corner booth while the dinner rush swirled around her. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photo of her mother she kept there. A woman in her 40s, tired but smiling, wearing a cleaning service uniform. The woman who'd taught Lena to survive by being invisible. "I'm not invisible anymore, Mom," Lena whispered to the image. "I'm so far from invisible that I own 5 restaurants and I'm terrified and I have no idea what I'm doing half the time. But I'm alive, really alive, not just surviving." A year ago, 6 words on a napkin had destroyed her anonymity. Tonight she held papers that would make her a restaurant owner, a businesswoman, someone with genuine power and autonomy. The journey from one to the other had been violent and terrifying and transformative. But Lena wouldn't trade it, not for safety, not for invisibility, not for the comfortable prison of a life unlived. She signed the documents 3 days later in Robert Chen's office, with Marco present as a witness. The lawyer had finally stopped questioning her qualifications, instead treating her like the successful operator she'd become. "Congratulations, Ms. Park," Robert said as he filed the papers. "You're now the majority owner of Park Restaurant Group. I've taken the liberty of drawing up some additional documents you'll need: corporate structure, tax optimization, succession planning." "Succession planning? I'm 27. And you own assets worth over $15 million. Succession planning is prudent." Robert's expression was professionally neutral, but Lena caught a hint of respect. She'd proven herself, even to the skeptics. After the signing, Marco walked Lena out of the office building into a crisp autumn afternoon. The city hummed around them, millions of people pursuing their own dreams and ambitions, their own transformations. "How does it feel?" Marco asked. "Surreal. Like I'm going to wake up back in my studio apartment and this will all have been a dream." Lena paused on the sidewalk, watching taxis flow past. "Marco, why did you really do this? Give me the restaurants?" "I told you, you earned them." "That's true, but it's not the whole truth." Lena turned to face him. "You could have kept ownership and just given me a bigger salary, more profit share. Transferring ownership means giving up control. That's not something you do lightly." Marco was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "Because I needed to prove I could. For 20 years, my power came from control, controlling territory, controlling people, controlling every variable. Going legitimate means learning to let go, to trust other people with things that matter. The restaurants matter, you matter. And I needed to prove to myself that I could hand over something valuable without strings attached, without maintaining hidden control. So I'm a test. You're proof. Proof that I've actually changed, that going legitimate isn't just a rebranding exercise." Marco's smile was slight but genuine. "Also, you're the best person to run these restaurants. Business decision and personal growth, all in one." They walked in comfortable silence for a few blocks, and Lena marveled at how much had changed. A year ago, Marco Bellucci had been a stranger whose life she'd saved on impulse. Now he was a business partner, a mentor, someone she trusted in ways she'd never trusted anyone. "What's next for you?" Lena asked. "If the restaurants are my project, what's yours?" "Continuing the transition, selling off the last of the old operations, converting everything to legitimate businesses. It'll take years and some people will never forgive me for it, but..." He paused. "I'm tired of living in the dark, Lena. Tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of the violence and the paranoia. I want to build something that can last, something I can be proud of. You've shown me that's possible." "I didn't show you anything. You made the choice to change before you ever met me." "I made the choice. You made it real. Marco stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Lena, that night in the restaurant, when you warned me about Isabella's trap, you didn't just save my life. You reminded me that there are still people in the world who do the right thing without calculating the payoff. I'd forgotten that was possible. You gave me hope that I could be that person again. The honesty in his voice made Lena's throat tight. I'm not some saint, Marco. I've made compromises. I've looked the other way when I probably shouldn't have. I'm not the person you think I am. You're exactly the person I think you are. Someone who tries to do right despite the costs. Someone who chooses courage over comfort. His smile was warm. That's all any of us can do. Try to be better than we were yesterday. 2 months later, Giordano's hosted another dinner. Smaller this time, more intimate. Just 10 people who mattered. Sarah Winters, who'd become not just a mentor but a friend. Jennifer Moss and her investment partners, who were now backing the expansion of Park Restaurant Group into new markets. Margaret Chen and other neighborhood business owners who'd supported Lena from the beginning. And Marco, sitting at the corner booth where everything had started. Lena stood to make a toast, her hands steady and her voice clear. A year ago, I was invisible. A waitress working in this restaurant, surviving paycheck to paycheck, believing that safety meant staying small. She paused, looking around the table at faces that had become familiar and important. Then one night, I made a choice. 6 words on a napkin that destroyed my anonymity and changed my life forever. I've been shot at, threatened, terrified. I've worked harder than I knew was possible. I've failed and learned and tried again. Lena's eyes found Marco's. I've also discovered that I'm stronger than I believed, that I'm capable of building something meaningful, that invisibility isn't safety, it's slow death. So this toast is to choices, to the scary ones that change everything, to the people who support us through transformation, and to the life we build when we stop hiding and start fighting for what we deserve. Everyone raised their glasses, the crystal chiming as they touched. And in that moment, in the restaurant where her old life had ended and her new one had begun, Lena felt something she'd never experienced before. Certainty. Not about the future. That was still uncertain, still full of challenges and risks. But certainty about herself, about her worth, about her right to take up space in the world and demand respect and build power on her own terms. The invisible waitress was gone, replaced by someone who owned restaurants and made strategic decisions and had people depending on her. Someone who'd pulled a trigger to survive and made hard choices and kept moving forward despite the fear. Someone who'd chosen her life instead of accepting what others thought she deserved. After the guests left, Lena sat alone in the empty restaurant, savoring the quiet. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marco. Thank you for tonight, for everything. I meant what I said. You gave me hope. That's not a small thing. Lena smiled, typing back. You gave me a chance. That's not small either. We're even, not even close. But I'll accept partners. Partners. The word encompassed everything they'd built together. Trust earned through crisis, respect proven through action, a shared vision of what legitimacy could look like. Not friends exactly, not family, but something equally valuable, allies in transformation. Lena locked up Giordano's and walked out into the October night. Her security detail waited discreetly at the corner. She'd learned to accept their presence, understanding it was the price of visibility. But tonight she didn't mind. Tonight the protection felt less like a cage and more like acknowledgement of her value. The walk home took her through Little Italy's familiar streets, past businesses owned by families who'd been here for generations. She belonged here now, not because she'd been born to it, but because she'd earned her place through work and risk and refusing to stay invisible. Her apartment, not the studio anymore, but a renovated loft in a secure building, was dark and quiet when she arrived. Lena made tea and sat by the window overlooking the city, watching lights glitter in the darkness. Somewhere out there, other invisible people were surviving paycheck to paycheck, believing safety meant staying small. Lena understood that impulse. She'd lived it for 26 years, but she also understood now that safety was an illusion. Real security came from power, not the kind that corrupted or destroyed, but the kind that let you protect yourself and build something lasting. The kind that gave you choices instead of limiting them. 6 words on a napkin. That's all it had taken to destroy one life and create another. Lena didn't regret those words. didn't regret the transformation they'd sparked. The invisible waitress had been surviving. The restaurant owner living in this loft was actually alive. And that made all the fear, all the violence, all the transformation worth it. Lena finished her tea and climbed into bed, her mind already planning tomorrow's tasks. New locations to scout, staff to interview, menus to refine. The work never ended, but she wouldn't want it to. The work was proof of her transformation, evidence that she'd become somebody. As she drifted toward sleep, Lena thought about the corner booth at Giordano's where she'd placed that fateful napkin. Marco had offered to preserve it as a monument to the night that changed everything. Lena had refused. The booth was just a booth. What mattered wasn't where the transformation started, but where it led. And Lena's transformation had led here, to power earned rather than given, to respect built through action, to a life chosen instead of accepted. She'd stopped being invisible. She'd started being impossible to ignore. That was enough. That was everything. The invisible choice had become a visible triumph, and Lena Park, former waitress and current restaurant owner, slept peacefully in the knowledge that she'd rewritten her own destiny. One word at a time, one choice at a time, one brave, terrifying step at a time, until invisibility became impossible, and the woman she'd always been meant to be finally emerged into the light.